I am honored and delighted to have the opportunity to present today's webinar, which is entitled Making a B'nai Mitzvah Shidduch, Matching the Service to the Learner. A few words of introduction. I am Howard Blass. I'm the director of the Tikva program at Camp Ramah in New England, which is an 8-week overnight camping program, inclusion program, and vocational training program for approximately 60 campers and young adults with disabilities. I am also a consultant to the National Ramah Commission on Disabilities Camping, where I work with our 8 Ramah camps around the country on issues of disability. I am also a freelance writer for many Jewish publications, and I live in New York City with my wife and 4 children. Today, I'm here in the capacity of being a lifelong lover of teaching all types of learners for bar and bat mitzvah. I have been blessed to work with families of all backgrounds and affiliations, including Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, and unaffiliated. Perhaps one of the most important things I have learned over the years is that when it comes to bar and bat mitzvah, one size does not fit all in terms of service, and certainly not in terms of method of instruction. So what are the options? Today, I will take you through how I think about each learner and how to decide on the right shidduch when it comes to celebrating B'nai Mitzvah. I often get calls from panicked parents who are very worked up at the idea of a bar or bat mitzvah for their child. They are worried because their child has a learning disability, or autism, or cerebral palsy, or some other special need or special circumstance. He will never get bar mitzvah, they tell me, to which I reply, all your child has to do is stay in his pajamas all day on his 13th Hebrew birthday, and he will automatically become bar mitzvah. They are incredulous. They don't believe me at first. As we speak, I tell them of adults, especially women of a certain age, who never got bat mitzvah, or Jews by choice, or people who grew up completely disconnected from Jewish life, but who got interested later in life in their Judaism. And I explain that they are allowed to come to the Torah even without a bar or bat mitzvah certificate in hand. Once they buy into my explanation, I begin discussing what B'nai Mitzvah may look like, since obviously most families prefer something a little more meaningful than a bar mitzvah day spent in PJs. As we know, the most common way of celebrating bar or bat mitzvah is on a Shabbat morning in a shul or temple, reading from the Torah, perhaps the Haftorah, leading some of the prayers, and delivering a Devar Torah, the bar mitzvah speech, which summarizes the portion of the day, finds some meaning for our times, and often references the mitzvah project. There are obviously many advantages of an in-synagogue Shabbat morning bar mitzvah, and this is true across the denominations. One, if you think about it, people do tend to be free on Saturdays. Very few people work on Saturdays in this country, which will not be true when we discuss other options in a bit. This maximizes attendance since Saturday is often a day off of work. In addition, having a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah in a synagogue on a Saturday morning is a way of joining the adult Jewish community. In most shuls, Saturday is the day when the community comes together. Now, admittedly, some synagogues have large Friday night services, but in general, Saturday morning is the day and time when the community comes together. So a Saturday bar or bat mitzvah is a way of publicly joining the adult community. A third reason for Shabbat morning bar or bat mitzvah, tradition. This is the way it has traditionally been done. So within a family, it is possible that the older brother or sister did it that way, and perhaps even the mom or the dad. If they grew up in the same temple, they may have done it the exact same way from the same bima. And of course, an obvious advantage of Saturday morning is that it works. Most kids get through the system. There is a structure in place for teaching the student and for celebrating the B'nai Mitzvah, and it's pretty low cost to the parents. I sometimes sarcastically comment, somewhat cynically, I call this the managed care approach to B'nai Mitzvah. Shuls and Hebrew schools have it down to a science, down to the number of sessions, when to start, what should be accomplished by which date, by which meeting date, when to meet with the rabbi and cantor, practice session dates, etc. The system simply works. I'd actually say it works for most students, perhaps 80%. I will discuss the other 20% in a few moments. But there are actually some disadvantages to Saturday morning B'nai Mitzvah. First, there is not much room for variation in the service. Most Shabbat morning services look pretty much the same. There is a certain formula and structure. The only real way for one student to look different from another is perhaps from his or her voice, Devar Torah, and outfit. The other disadvantage is that the system doesn't really take into account those with learning issues, fear of public speaking and performance anxiety, those with elective mutism, those who need augmented communication devices like a Dynavox, those who are blind or deaf, those who have autism, those who have motor or mobility issues, tactile issues, extreme ADHD, etc. Now, I don't mean to suggest that Shabbat morning B'nai Mitzvah should be taken off the table simply because a child has some type of special need. More and more synagogues across the country and across denominations are doing a great job tuning in to individual differences, and they are even sensitively pairing students with different strengths and weaknesses who complement each other. Other accommodations that I have seen, there are many. One perhaps dramatic example, which I will discuss in greater detail in a few moments, involves using a Dynavox, an augmented communication device in an Orthodox synagogue on a Shabbat morning. And of course, a very common accommodation is allowing a learner with learning issues to put his or her transliterated sheets right next to the Sefer Torah. A word about the students in these photos and a disclaimer. Yishai, in the left photo, is a very talented former camper in our Camper Ma program who would be considered twice exceptional, a term which I admit I had never heard until maybe 5 or 10 years ago. This means that he is off the charts in two directions, capable of learning philosophy or Talmud on a graduate school level, even when he was a teenager, but with cerebral palsy and unable to read written material. His bar mitzvah is actually the only one of the ones in the slides that I'll show which took place on a Shabbat morning. The bar mitzvah on the right took place in a conservative shul where photography would not have been permitted on Shabbat. It actually took place on the Sunday of Chol HaMoed Sukkot. So what are some of the rather simple, minor accommodations synagogues do to make it work for people with disabilities? My friend Jason Lieberman, who appears on the left and the right of this slide, he's an adult with a master's degree, he's married, he's the father of a 2-year-old son, he has cerebral palsy, and he tells of how he and his family educated the rabbi and the community 20 years ago about accessibility and accommodations. In his case, he didn't carry the Torah around the congregation, as was the norm for bar and bat mitzvah students, and he was permitted to actually come up on the bima way before the Torah service. In Jason's words, it didn't seem fair to hold the congregation up for the 20 minutes it would have taken to get him up onto the bima. In the case of another student, the mother of one of my former students told me a very interesting story about one of her biggest bar mitzvah day fears. Her son, who is now in his 30s, attended an Ivy League college and works in real estate banking, and also has cerebral palsy. He has mobility and stability issues which are very evident. In addition, his speech is initially very hard to understand. The parents were very worried about the very special moment in the service when the rabbi puts his hands over the child's head, addresses him, and offers the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing. Why were they worried? Just touching his head would destabilize him and he might fall. So, simply educating the rabbi about a matter that he or she would have never known about led to awareness and sensitivity, and they simply left their hands off of his head. So back to the example I referred to earlier, which is rather dramatic, took place in an Orthodox synagogue where electricity and electronics are not ordinarily permitted on Shabbat. This young man, who is now grown up, had a brain tumor as a baby and is, thank God, still alive and well, but he's unable to speak. So I will spare you the halachic Jewish law discussions, but the rabbi found a way to permit the bar mitzvah boy to use a Dynavox. It is shown in the center of the screen. Back in those days, it was much less sophisticated, but it is an augmented communication device. And this young man learned which buttons to push so that he could activate his father's pre-recorded voice, which had the father singing the Torah blessings, delivering a Devar Torah, and singing Ein Keloheinu and Adon Olam for the entire congregation. Other easy accommodations a synagogue might be able to do in order to make it work for a child with special needs. I know some synagogues who have been quite sensitive, as I said earlier, in pairing up children for a double bar mitzvah. The truth is, some synagogues have been reluctant to pair a child with disabilities with a far more quote-unquote capable child. I have found that often the two will complement each other very nicely, and in a way, it is harder for the neurotypical child since all eyes are on the other child. Some temples have suggested moving the bar mitzvah to a slightly smaller room in the synagogue, for example, the chapel. I once worked with a boy at a Reform temple, and this particular temple offered three options: the main sanctuary, which was attended by lots of people, the chapel with fewer people and fewer distractions, and the rabbi's study for just the immediate family, no guests. It took place on a Shabbat morning, and it was a very simple, meaningful service. It was very short, and it was the perfect venue for a young man with behavior issues, anxiety, ADHD, and divorced parents who did not get along very well. Some synagogues might be willing to shorten the service, being sensitive to the extreme attentional issues of a certain student. I know this may not be considered an accommodation, but some synagogues are sensitive to those around them with sensory issues, like smells, for example. Some people are sensitive to perfumes, and they may make an announcement about that ahead of time. Some students are very sensitive to clothes which may chafe or bother them, so they don't get bent out of shape about what a child might wear to his or her bar mitzvah. I have seen, to say that a little better, some kids have sensitivity to tags or to fabrics or to ties or to jackets, and really have no problem with a boy wearing a pullover shirt as opposed to a jacket and tie. So until now, we've been talking about accommodations so a child can celebrate an in-shul Shabbat morning bar mitzvah. Some families might prefer to consider a non-Shabbat morning option. So I'd like for you to meet Shira on the left, Josh with his teacher, me, in the center, and Alexa, aka Minnie Mouse, in the left with the Minnie Mouse ears. Shira celebrated her bat mitzvah on a Friday night in an Orthodox synagogue. Following services, the family and guests went to a neighborhood kosher restaurant, which had agreed to stay open for a special Shabbat dinner, where they had paid ahead. And Shira narrated the entire meal. She essentially explained the reasons for the candle lighting and the kiddush and hand washing and hamotzi and Birkat Hamazon, and she gave a short Devar Torah, and she summarized the Jewish learning we had done together. Josh, in the center, celebrated his bar mitzvah on the Monday of a federal holiday. This is a wonderful option. If you think about it, in the United States, most of our federal holidays are on Mondays. Martin Luther King's birthday, President's Day, Memorial Day, Labor Day, and there are no restrictions in Orthodox or conservative synagogues on microphones or other technology. In this case, Josh is a very quiet guy, so he was able to use a microphone. Photography was permitted, and therefore people were able to, even Sabbath observers who might have lived at a far distance were able to show up and not worry about staying over in town. On the right is Alexa. She is a camper in my Camper Mom program. She celebrated her bat mitzvah on the Sunday of Purim. Now, Purim is a wonderful option for many, many students. It is very hard to take yourself too seriously when all guests are dressed as Ninja Turtles or Crayola crayons. And one could read from the Megillah, the Purim story. One can read from the Torah. There are other options as well, which are not Shabbat. For example, Shabbat Mincha. The benefits of a Shabbat afternoon bar mitzvah: the service is shorter, fewer people attend. Even reading the maximum amount of Torah reading amounts to no more than 10 or 15 verses, and it's much more relaxed. Another option, Rosh Chodesh, the start of each Hebrew month. By simple math and probability, several Rosh Chodeshes a year will take place on Sundays, and they're not usually super well attended. So it means fewer people. It means being able to use microphone and technology, even in an Orthodox or conservative synagogue. And one who masters some or all of the Torah reading for that day could continue to come back to synagogue and read on new months for the rest of their lives. And on Rosh Chodesh, there's no Haftorah. When you learn the Haftorah, it's something that you may not get to do ever again, since at most the same Haftorah is read once a year. As I said, Mondays and Thursdays are great options. Thursday, I can remember a boy making his bar mitzvah on the Thursday of Thanksgiving. That's an option. Hanukkah, one can read the Torah any of the 8 days of Hanukkah. So there will always be at least one Sunday during Hanukkah. Oftentimes, Hanukkah and Christmas fall at the same time, so people are oftentimes off on vacation. And as one very astute, sensitive Orthodox rabbi pointed out, the Torah reading each day of Hanukkah is rather repetitive. So if one learns one of the offerings brought on a particular day, he can easily learn the ones brought on the other days. So one could learn a rather large quantity, though it's an easier reading to learn. I thought that was really quite sensitive. To be honest, for many reasons, many conservative and Reform congregations don't offer these options. Many simply don't have mincha services Shabbat afternoon or a morning minyan on a daily basis. Some synagogues worry about fairness. Offering everybody a Shabbat bar mitzvah makes it very equitable. But these are really wonderful options to consider. As I said, the readings are often much shorter. There are also out of synagogue options, as these next few slides show, which really shows thinking outside of the box. We tend to celebrate one or two bar mitzvahs at Camp Ramah every summer, or perhaps every couple of summers. And I believe there's a precedent in Orthodox camps for families trekking up to camp when a boy turns 13 and a day. The family really wanted to mark the first moment when the boy becomes bar mitzvah, so they would come up to camp, even if it was the middle of the summer. And camp, it's comfortable, it's relaxed, it's familiar, and you're surrounded by people who love you. The two photos on the left show one of our Camp Ramah campers, Bennett, who celebrated bar mitzvah with friends overlooking the lake in a very relaxed, familiar environment. The photos on the right show Jake and his father at Camp Jake. His family created a bar mitzvah service for Shabbat Mincha, but it was in the context of inviting family and friends to spend the weekend at Camp Getaway, sort of like a destination wedding, where all the people there were comfortable with each other after spending the weekend together. They had been ziplining and playing tug of war and swimming and eating together. So by the time the bar mitzvah service arrived, everybody was really relaxed and comfortable, and nobody flinched when the bar mitzvah had to quickly be moved indoors due to some unexpected rain. I have also attended bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs of several students in Fire Island, an island community in New York where there are 2 synagogues. And the dress code, even at the Orthodox shul, short pants and a polo shirt. Very, very chill and relaxed. Let's not forget Israel. Not only is it meaningful and a good value for the dollar, there are so many meaningful options. And the setting can be picked based on a child's interest. History, nature, a certain Bible story. For example, Ne'ev Kedumim is a biblical nature reserve in Israel where they have every type of plant that's mentioned in the Bible. Masada obviously has wonderful history. Lotem is an accessible nature path in Israel. So kids who have interest in disabilities, it's a wonderful option as well. Many of my students have chosen to make their own services, which are essentially a modified Shabbat morning service or a slightly embellished afternoon service, held anywhere from a room in a hotel. Now I'm speaking about New York, could be held at the Jewish Theological Seminary. This photograph takes place in the garden of the Union Theological Seminary. They're willing to rent out their space. Casa Italiana or faculty club at Columbia University. I suspect these options exist in places throughout the country if one is a little bit creative. Certainly hotels are willing to rent out a smaller room for that occasion. The benefit is that it is very inclusive and it can be set up to showcase a child's strengths and talents from music to art. I find that the more a child does, English readings, explanations, calling up people to the Torah for the Aliyahs, Torah reading, a speech, the more he does, the less nervous he or she gets. Since, unlike in a synagogue, there is no one dramatic moment when all eyes are on the child. I've seen children play guitar. I've seen children display some of their artwork, even design the actual siddur and choose the pictures and do the artwork. So how do you decide on the ideal bar mitzvah? So I would go back to the culture in the synagogue and suggest that creating a culture in the synagogue where differences are valued and conformity to one standard is not always necessary is important. So that's a way of saying that a family that is asking for a Monday morning bar mitzvah or a mincha bar mitzvah isn't necessarily looking for a shortcut or something that's going to be a quickie. There could be a really good reason for it. Honest conversation between the family and the synagogue is really important. Explain to the rabbi and to the rest of the clergy, why it is that you're nervous. Is it an issue of attention? Is it an issue of sensory issues? In this conversation, weigh out the pluses and minuses of each option in the synagogue versus out. Now, it is hard to know many years down the road, looking back, what the child's experience is, but there are definitely benefits of going in many different directions. The clergy and we can remind family that one really becomes bar or bat mitzvah, so there are many different options, and reassure them that you're willing to make it work for them. How do I measure success? I always say that success is knowing that when I rang the doorbell to the child's house, the child didn't have a stomach ache. I think that in many cases, people don't remember all of the content, but really they remember the experience. When the child looks back, he or she should see this experience and this moment as being full of joy and wonderful and successful. The goal is for the process to be positive and for the day to be a true celebration. So really work hard together to find a proper shidduch and make the day really beautiful. Now, I really appreciate your time and attention, and I would be very happy to speak with anybody or to email with them if they would like to discuss bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah options. Thank you.